Why has Anton Silayev been rocketing up the draft boards? We discuss on today's episode.
You're Locked On Sharks, your daily podcast on the San Jose Sharks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome to Locked On Sharks, the premier hockey podcast covering your favorite team, the Bay Area. My name is JD Young, contributor at San Jose Hockey Now. I want to thank you for making Locked On Sharks your first listen, probably part of the Locked On Network. We cover your team every day. If you want to be an everydayer, all you have to do is just follow wherever you get podcasts or both. Or you can watch this on YouTube as well. Today, we're going to be doing another draft profile with our good friend Sebastian from the Locked On NHL Prospects channel. So we're going to talk about Anton Silayev. He's very tall. Talk about why he's been kind of climbing up the draft boards and if he would make a lot of sense for the Sharks. His comparison to Shakir Mukhamadullin, and then get Sebastian's thoughts on the 2024 draft. So before we get into all that, do want to let you guys know today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app, use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. And now we bring in one half of the Locked On NHL Prospects duo, Sebastian High. Also, one of the big guys over at Dauber. What are you now, like super duper overlord of all that is drafting and prospects at Dauber now, Sebastian?
That is indeed the official title, yes.
That's a long business card. I hope it's like Foles or something like that. So, Sebastian High, how's it going, buddy?
It's going well. I mean, the draft cycle is continuing. Things are getting heated up. We just released our midterm rankings over at Dauber Prospects, which is very exciting. A full top 64, and we're going to expand that up to a top 100 in the coming months. So lots of prospects to watch. It's a seemingly unending puddle that you can just keep delving into and just keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper. You can never quite watch enough players or get enough viewings of each player, but it's a very fun time nonetheless.
Yeah, I mean, I've been kind of just doing Sharks prospects, and I'm always like, oh, I wish I could have watched this game or I could have watched this game. There's only so much time in the day. But one guy who's got all of our time, at least for the next 20 to 30 minutes, Anton Silayev. So if you do not know about Anton Silayev, let me introduce you. 6'7", 207 pounds left. He's a big boy, left-handed defenseman playing over in the KHL. 63 games, all in the KHL. 3 goals, 8 assists, 103 shots on goal. So, Sebastian, what makes Anton Silayev such an intriguing prospect?
A lot of things. It's mainly the upside. This is a very, very, very raw player. If we're talking best player currently, he would not be in the top 10 by any stretch of the imagination. But he is really intriguing. He's very inconsistent, which is where a lot of this skepticism might come from, and I know that's a lot more present in the public sphere than it is in the private sphere. NHL teams adore this kid, and it's pretty obvious to see why. He has by far the highest upside as a transition defender that I have seen in the last 3 drafts. He is able to close gaps with unbelievable aggressiveness and on a turn of a dime. Like, he can do it without warning, and when he's on his game, there are no entries on his side of the ice at the KHL level, which is diminishing level of competition, but still really, really good for a 17-year-old player to be playing against. And that is just probably like one of like the main facets that makes him so intriguing. Like, having a 6'7" shutdown transition defender is awesome to have. And over the course of the season, he's been really learning to use his physicality, his size, to overwhelm the opposition in board battles against, like, on the cycle, clearing the net front. He's really learning how to use his size to create advantages defensively. His on-puck game offensively is a much bigger work in progress, but we've been seeing with Silayev this season that he is working on all the areas of his game, but the progression's a little bit quicker defensively. It's a bit more intuitive for him. He is 6'7", so he's a little bit wonky at times.
Yep.
But he's a tremendous skater. He's superbly mobile. He has the strongest stride in this entire draft class. I've seen him be able to get from blue line to blue line with a little bit of momentum, but with only needing one stride in those two zones to get from blue line to blue line, because he is really, really strong. So he's a fascinating case study in terms of how he moves, and if he's able to outgrow that albatross-esque quality of just being too big for what you're used to with your body, when or if that happens, you are going to have an absolute unicorn of a mover on the ice with how he's able to get around when you combine that size, the physicality, and the mobility all together. And there's so much to like here, and NHL teams go crazy over this type of profile of player, and I get it. Like, you do not acquire
if a
these by
GM has
trade.
to look up, they're pretty.
Oh my god! Oh, like you can stack two GMs on top of each other, and they still be looking a little bit upwards at Silayev.
Yeah, that's just Danny Briere. Danny Briere is just three kids in a trench coat. But no, you mentioned the moving, one stride. It's almost like the Monsters Inc. Like, oh, he's walking to work. Well, it takes him 2 strides to get to work.
Yeah,
kind of thing. But I mean, with this size, right? There's a reason why GMs like guys that are 6'7", because you can cover so much space. Like, look at Brent Burns, right? Brent Burns. Not the greatest defender in the world, but he could get from one side of the rink super quickly to make up for any mistakes. It kind of helps with that, where you're not having to kind of that's one of the problems with smaller defenders, right? Is you have to. It takes them much more work and effort to get from one side to the other, just because that stride. So, what do you think as he continues his progression? He's going to be in the KHL for at least 2 more seasons, and we'll talk about his development timeline here. What do you think, though, is going to be kind of his calling card thing, that, like, when he, fully matures, what is going to be the thing that we point to and be like, okay, this is what he does. This is what makes him special?
I think it would have to be shut down defending. Like, that is where I've seen a lot of upside. The offensive game, like, the projection of it remains highly theoretical at this stage, and predictive rather than concrete. Like, he had a massive, like, scoring streak to start off the season, and everyone was, like, hyping him up as, like, the future offensive defenseman that's 6'7". But it was all coming off of secondary assists and like just point shots that get redirected and so on and so forth, and was not sustainable. And ever since the production has fallen off, his play has really improved, because he's been actually working on the smaller details of his game. But he's not the greatest puck handler, especially like in tight, close to his skates and his body. And at the NHL level, that's what you really need to be able to use to be an escapable puck handler. So I don't know how great the upside is as a puck carrier in transition. He's learning to be a pretty effective breakout passer, but his on-puck game really isn't the biggest strength. I think that his off-puck game brings a lot more to be desired, including in the offensive zone and in transition. He's starting to really play off the puck a lot stronger, support his line mates, but it remains pretty straightforward and simplistic, and not in a bad way, but not in a game-breaking way either. It's on the defensive side of things where the upside is just astronomical. Like, the gap closing, the transition defending remains a bit inconsistent. Like, he's been quite over-aggressive at times, especially earlier on in this season, where he tries to, like, be hyper aggressive, like, before the red line, and then it's just a odd man rushes galore off of his side of the ice. But he's starting to rein himself in a little bit more, be a little bit more deliberate with when he steps up in the neutral zone, or even delaying that into the defensive zone, because he can just suffocate play into the boards. He doesn't have to make that big decisive play to protect the blue line, to regain possession. But on the cycle as well, like, he's really learning a lot of how to use his tools to his advantage. And again, if he's able to kind of shed away some of that awkwardness and refine his decision making, like, he's still a bit deer in the headlights, especially when he's pressured by forecheckers in the breakout. Like, there's a lot to kind of iron out, and there's a reason that nobody's talking about him still being in the KHL for 2 more years being an issue, because he's going to need at least 3 or 4 years before he's like a really impactful and consistent NHLer, and that consistency is going to really take some time to build up. But yeah, the upside is wild. He could be one of the most aggressive and scary defensemen to play against in the league if he's developed in that way. And I also think that his like breakout passing game has some real room to grow and some significant upside. And in the NHL, at least the modern game, you really do need to have some level of on puck value to be a steady like top 4 or maybe even top 2 presence. And I think that's Silayev's breakout game and his accuracy of passing when he is composed, when he's not panicking, it gives him enough of something to kind of grasp on, where I think that his transition metrics could actually be decent in the NHL if he's developed correctly in that sense.
All right, before we continue with Sebastian, we talk about Silayev versus Mukhamadullin. We already have a toolsy left-handed Russian defenseman at home. Kind of compare those guys, how they would fit in. And then, of course, we'll talk about the 2024 draft at large with Sebastian here in just 1 minute. We're past the halfway point of the season, Sharks fans, and I know it has been a rough one. Regardless of where the Sharks are at in the current standings, I want to remind you that you can win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our #1 choice for daily fantasy sports, especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is pick some of your favorite players, whether they're NHL superstars like McDavid, Crosby, or McKinnon, or some of your favorite Sharks players like Fabian Zetterlund, Mikael Granlund, or Henry Thrun. Record more or less than their sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus minus, and more in a given game. 100 times bet on Sleeper. You need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, Sharks fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL. You'll get a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. All right, so let's talk about his development. First of all, just pairing with Luca Cagnoni, one for the comedy effect of seeing Luca Cagnoni is like 5'9". It's like almost a complete foot between the two of them, but like their skill set seems to kind of work really well. But so let's talk about his development. You know, we mentioned he's going to have to spend, he's at least in the KHL for 2 seasons, and that's fine. You just let him go marinate over there, and then it's probably going to be another season, maybe season and a half in the AHL, you assume, where he's getting used to North American ice, getting used to the different pace of play, coming over here and to play with America. Is that seems like a realistic path for him?
Yeah, for sure. Like, I think at least 1 season in the AHL before he hits the NHL, he's going to have to adapt his style once he makes that transition in terms of the ice surfaces. Like right now in the KHL, he has an advantage that is way bigger than it will be in the NHL in terms of the stride strength and how much ground he's able to cover, and that being like absolutely game breaking when you have like these massive ice surfaces where being able to close those gaps in just 1 or 2 strides is not normal. Whereas in the NHL with smaller ice with less width, that's going to still be explosive and important, but it's not going to be quite as big of a difference-making facet. And he's going to have to kind of adjust how he plays the game, how he approaches defending as a result. But he's going to be very good once he develops, but it just will take some time. And especially if he's drafted 2nd or 3rd overall, which is entirely possible, I wouldn't be surprised if the fan base of whichever team ends up having Silayev be a little bit frustrated when in year 3 or beginning of year 4 he's still not in the big leagues after being a top 5 pick. Like, patience is going to be a virtue with this player, and it's one of the reasons that like we at Double Prospects have him ranked in like I believe like 12th overall, but he's been in our like 8 to 13 range all season, so he's ranked at the lower end of where we have had him over the course of the year right now. but it's going to take time, and with time comes impatience, and with impatience comes neglect in development. And
Yep.
that is not impossible with Silayev because he still does remain so raw, but at the same time, this is this profile of player is rarely neglected in terms of development by NHL organizations. So he's the type of raw player that I think has a pretty high likelihood of being able to iron out a lot of issues as a result, as long as he's not rushed.
I think, I mean, we've been kind of beating around the bush here, but it just sounds like 3-inch taller Shakir Mukhamadullin, right? I mean, it's
A lot more
basically it. Like,
defensive upside. Like
a
a
lot more
lot
defensive
more.
ups. Yeah, I think Mukhamadullin is probably a little bit more of a two-way player, but like I mean, I know the Sharks didn't draft Mukhamadullin, but they have been very patient with him, right? He got his
For sure.
taste, got a couple games this year, and he'll probably get a couple more games after the trade deadline here. But like, even look at like William Eklund. Sharks very patient with William Eklund, spending an entire season in the AHL. With most of us, myself included, were like, please put William Eklund in the NHL. I
He was
want to
good
see William
enough.
Eklund. He's good enough, right? But again, now William Eklund, I think it's paying off. You're seeing William Eklund play 20 minutes a night in all situations.
Yeah.
But like, the Sharks, they already have the blueprint with Shakir Mukhamadullin. So does it make a lot of sense for them as they continue to add more pieces to their blue line to add a guy like Silayev?
I think it still would. I think that Silayev would be the potential first pairing contrast whereas Mukmadullin's ceiling probably caps out as a number 3, number 4 defenseman if everything continues going at its current trajectory and he doesn't just like plateau in the next year or two. And the nice thing, if you have both Mukhamadullin and Silayev as your left-hand defenseman in your top 4, you have some versatility with that because you have two comparable stylistic players, also in terms of size and what they can offer. I think that Mukhamadulin's offensive game is a lot more refined at this stage, but it wasn't when he was draft eligible. Like he's come a long way since then, and Silayev could have a similar trajectory with his offensive game, which I think would elevate him into that like number 1 defenseman potential conversation if he's able to do so. And I've always quite liked it when teams have a couple similar players in their lineup. That makes line juggling a lot easier in game. When, for instance, like with the Montreal Canadiens, when Kirby Dach is healthy, when you have both Kirby Dach and Nick Suzuki as your 2 top line centers, you have some flexibility there. Both are excellent passers, really smart possession-based players, not going to overwhelm the opponent with high-end, like super high-end skill moves or anything along those lines, but are very composed and possession-oriented and intelligent in how they approach the game. As a result, the wingers have a slight sense of predictability no matter who they're playing with inside that top 6. And I think a similar thing could be said having a combination of Silayev and Mukhamadullin, whoever's on the right-hand side, even if, for instance, you slot Luca Cagnoni in on the right as an offensive-oriented defenseman on his offside. Being able to juggle a little bit with those players, I think, isn't a bad thing, and trying to figure out where chemistry develops naturally as a result. But at the same time, would Silayev be necessarily the most fan favorite pick for the Sharks fan base with what they currently have? Perhaps not. I'm not going to argue that here either. But I don't think that Silayev would be surplus to requirements either. I think he would immediately slot in as San Jose's top defensive prospect by a decent margin.
So I mean, this kind of your 2 questions here. One, as a Montreal Canadiens fan who drafted Reinbacher, who's kind of more of it known of his defensive, prowess.
Sure.
And I know a lot of Canadiens fans right now are like, dude, what do we do here? Are you just kind of playing this waiting game with him? And then I guess the other question is, if you have a defenseman like that we expect Silayev to be, and maybe there's some offense there like you mentioned, but like this guy's gonna be, is that worth taking as a potential top 10, top 5, maybe even second as overall pick, where you're kind of boxing this guy in as like he has to be a superstar defenseman or else maybe the value isn't quite there?
Yeah, like I think there's also a reason that we at Double Prospects do have him at 12th overall. Like we have some of these similar questions. I think if you're comparing him to David Reinbacher, I personally am a bigger fan of Silayev as a draft eligible talent than I was of
Why do you hate
Reinbacher.
Reinbacher? Gosh.
I don't hate Reinbacher. I liked Reinbacher. It was so unfortunate because I first stumbled upon David Reinbacher in November of the draft cycle when he was on very few radars overall, and I brought up his name in our second Dobber Prospects ranking meeting last season, and only one other person had even seen the guy, and I was like, no, he's a first round talent. He's that good. Like I like this guy so much. I think we ranked him like 24th overall.
Monkey's paw, total monkey's paw thing for you, isn't it? Right?
2 months later, he's in the top 5, and I'm like, oh my god, no, I don't know about this. But he's a really solid defensive defenseman. I like Reinbacher. The thing with Silayev is that I think the upside is a lot bigger. I think there's a lot more room to grow in his game than Reinbacher himself has. That said, Reinbacher certainly has higher offensive upside. I just think that Silayev could be a game-breaking, transition beast. Like it could possibly in both directions if you can work on the handling a little bit as well as the defensive value. I think there's a ton there, and with Reinbacher, it's a lot. Reinbacher's floor is significantly higher than Silayev's. Like Reinbacher, I don't think will be anything less than a good number 3, and Silayev could be a really painful to watch number 4 if he doesn't pan out, because the decision making has some serious warts at times. But I think that when you're picking that high in the draft, you kind of have to just take some hard swings. And I understand that Reinbacher might have that higher floor, but I would personally be more willing to sacrifice a 5th overall draft pick for a player like Silayev than I would have been with Reinbacher last season.
All right, before we continue with our good friend Sebastian, I just need to take a quick break here. Passion, drive, and patience, what brings home the winning trophy. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guarantee Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guarantee Fit only available to U.S. customers. Let's get into some of your thoughts on the 2024 draft. So I know we had you and Hattie on kind of talk about it, but again, want to get your opinion. So it's Macklin Celebrini's world, right? We're all just living in it. There's no, I've already started to see could Silayev or somebody like that be there one? No, right? It's Macklin Celebrini number 1, and then we're all trying to figure out number 2, right?
For sure. It's wide open after number 1, which is one of the things that I find so exciting about this draft class specifically. There is so much contention in that top end range as soon as you get to that 2nd overall pick. Like Macklin Celebrini is going to be a game-breaking number 1 center for a long time, and whoever gets the number 1 overall pick is going to be very happy. And if that's Sharks fans, you're going to be able to celebrate a ton because he's good. But if you don't land Celebrini, there's a ton of options. And Silayev's a really intriguing one, perhaps. He's not the one that I personally would be pursuing. I think one of the fun things is that you have a ton of really high-end skill that isn't necessarily entirely tangible just yet and how it's going to project in the NHL, but is incredibly dynamic and just overwhelming in players like Berkeley Catton and Ivan Demidov. Just really intelligent players with the puck on their sticks are able to leverage the tools that they have to their utmost maximum, especially with Demidov, who's one of the funniest skaters I've ever seen or scouted in my life, because the input with him is not great. He doesn't have great stride mechanics or anything like that, but his inside edges are so good. They're far better than even Antonio Strange's inside edge work, and he's able to just kind of float around the ice in all 4 directions whenever he wants to, which makes him so slippery and so escapable. So there's some really fun players along those lines, but even when you get a little bit deeper into the draft class, once you get past like that glut of big defensemen that have some size to offer, like Artem Levshunov, with value on both ends of the ice, Sam Dickinson comes to mind as well. You get into a range of just super fun forwards that are likely going to be second liners as they top out, but have some really intriguing specific skill sets. Like Konsta Helenius is one of the smartest players in this entire draft class. Really, really, like he's the definition of a line connector. Really smart passer. I have some questions about the overall toolkit. Like I think that there's nothing that is all that much better than just above average apart from the intelligence. And that adds a little bit of question around just how high his upside could be. But he's a really high likelihood second line center for a long time, which is a really intriguing player. But one that I want to highlight is a player that I have ranked 8th overall, who has not yet gotten too much talk in that top end range, is Igor Chernyshov. Chernyshov is a like modern European style power forward in that he combines strength with fluidity, with handling skill and goal scoring prowess. Kind of along the same line stylistically, not in terms of upside, but stylistically like the Mikko Rantanens and Yuri Slafkovskys of the world. And the playmaking game with him is the massive question mark. Like it remains he telegraphs every single pass he makes on a 2-on-1. Like you can see it from a mile away. He tries, but it's not quite enough. But he's a really good goal scorer, and he's been playing some excellent both defensive and transition hockey in both the MHL and the KHL so far this season, which has been really intriguing. Like his defensive game is really, really intricate. He's a really consistent scanner, constantly making micro adjustments to get into passing lanes. He will be very aggressive when he sees a puck that is a little bit loose. If a player takes a hard touch on a stick, he will be pouncing for it and trying to apply pressure. And right when he does force a turnover, he really is great at just like pouncing attack and skating up ice, but he's quite mobile. He's a good and powerful skater. He's able to switch lanes. He uses his line mates very actively. He's not one to try to do too much with the puck on his stick, especially in the KHL. And I think that there's a ton of upside with this player, especially as a goal scorer as well in the offensive zone. And he'll have like his handling abilities also significantly above average. Like, there's a ton to like with Chernyshov, and he has a high work rate. Really intriguing. And yeah, it's a fun draft class. Lots of like kind of like potential unicorns. Like Silayev would be a potential unicorn if he can pan out. Jesse Pulkkinen is like the weirdest unicorn that I've seen in the draft class in a long time. A D+1 6'6" defenseman, left shot, who is one of the most mobile skaters in this draft class, has incredible range, is a really good transition defender, and can handle the puck like he's a 5'8" like playmaking winger. So he's quite fun, and he might even go in like the top 25 range as an overager, which we haven't seen since Yegor Chernyshov. I don't think Chinnikov. I'm thinking too much about draft eligibles, clearly. But it's a fun draft class for sure.
I mean, you know, for Sharks fans, right, we're looking at a lot of defensemen, and you know, especially kind of circling that Pittsburgh Penguins pick, especially if Mac Celebrini comes home. And so, like, you know, kind of sorting through a lot of these potential mid-round defensemen, like, what are you kind of looking for those guys? Because they all have question marks, right? All these guys, it's like, oh, he does this really great, but, you know, like Sam Dickinson, he does this, but this, or like, so what are you kind of looking for, you know, for maybe one of these mid-round picks?
I think with what the Sharks currently have, like, you have like a bit of a lack of size apart from Shakir Mukhamadullin. Like, he stands about 2 heads taller than every other defensive prospect in this pool. And like, if you're going for an undersized defenseman, I think that, like, if for instance Zane Parekh slips, he'd be amazing. Otherwise, Alphonse Frey is a super fun playmaking play driver from the blue line. Like the best Swedish prospect this year by a decent margin in my eyes. Really dynamic. But if we're looking more in terms of that, like, more steadying presence on the blue line, which I think that San Jose has always quite appreciated to have, one player that I would be quite interested in for the Sharks would be Dominik Bedinka. He is he's a Czech defenseman. He's been playing almost this entire season in the SHL with Malmö, and he's been a really steadying presence on their back end. He's 6'3", right shot. Really solid skater, like well above average, gets around the ice really fluidly, can close gaps aggressively, uses his physicality to clear the net front and win board battles. And he's really, really good in the breakout, like really good in the breakout. He always has a simple pass in his back pocket, but is constantly looking for higher danger pass to make, a stretch pass through the neutral zone, for instance. And he's a very accurate and swift passer. So there's significant upside there as a breakout passer in my eyes. The offensive game's a bit more limited. He's not a great handler. He reminds me a lot of David Reinbacher in quite a few ways, and we'll see if he rises up the draft board like Reinbacher did. But he definitely has the profile of a player that will go top 20 come draft day, despite not really being the biggest first round conversation name just yet. But I think whether it be a first round target or a second round target, depending how his draft stock continues, a composed, intelligent, and toolsy big right shot defenseman who's been playing really good minutes in the KHL this season, that will be a pretty good player for the Sharks to add to their cupboard.
Especially if you have potentially 4 top picks or picks in the top 50 and whatever the Sharks add on and with the trade deadline. So, all right, Sebastian, we'll get you out here these last 2 questions. 5 years from now, which player other than Macklin Celebrini are we talking about as the best player from this draft?
Ivan Demidov. I think it's going to be between him and Berkeley Catton or Caden Lindstrom. Actually, I like Lindstrom a bit more than Catton, but like Demidov has astronomical potential. Like he's unlike any other winger that I've scouted in the last couple of years. Like there's been a lot of comps with Matt Michkov, but he plays the game in a really different way. He's a lot more defensively engaged, has a way higher motor. He's far more playmaking oriented than goal scoring oriented, but he's just as capable a goal scorer as Michkov as a playmaker, and just really, really dynamic and fun. He's quite raw, but he plays with a level of confidence that no player other than Macklin Celebrini maybe can match in this draft class. He knows exactly what he has in terms of his toolkit and how he can impact the game. And his development might be stagnating slightly because SK St. Petersburg is allergic to playing their super high skill young wingers, and he's just rotting in the MHL. And by rotting, I mean he's lighting it on fire, but he's not really being challenged this season so far. But I think that if he's able to kind of make that jump to the next level next season and actually get those big minutes, you are going to see him absolutely light up professional competition. And he has to start reining in his game a little bit. He can be a bit of a pond hockey style player at times with the puck on his stick, but the upside is super, super high.
All right. And then where does Silayev go in the draft? Give me the pick.
Third.
Third.
Going high.
Congrats, Anaheim. You just selected Silayev. So
honestly, it's a pretty Anaheim pick. Like he's really toolsy. You see what they're doing with Mintyukov, who had some of this, like obviously way more offensive skill than Silayev. But fun organization. And
at least
every
it's not
Sharks fan's favorite, I'm sure.
At least it's not another like 6'3", just awesome center that they're just adding to their pipeline. That's what I worry about. If they don't get Celebrini, like I worry about like Lindstrom going there because I love Lindstrom. Like that, he's kind of the guy I'm pointing. If the Sharks don't get Celebrini, he's kind of the guy I'm like. He makes the most sense for what the Sharks I think are trying to build. He would be very nice in teal. But yeah, I worry about that one. So Sebastian, thank you so much. As always, where can the people find you, buddy?
At _Sebastian on Twitter. That's where I centralize all my stuff. You can also follow the Locked On NHL Prospects Twitter or YouTube. We put out a lot of content there, 2.5 hours of prospect talk every single week. And please give us topic ideas because it feels like we're running out sometimes.
Believe me, buddy. I know that feeling, especially when your team constantly loses as much. That's why I do these draft profiles because,
it's more fun.
Gotta look towards the future. As Whitney Houston once said, I believe the children are our future. So, Sebastian, thank you so much, buddy, and we'll chat again soon.